Yo, what's up? We're back again with another video. This is the part 2 of the Balanced Druid class guide video. I really wanted to separate these out into Legendaries, Covenants, Conduits, and Soulbinds in the base class. This is the second one, so check out part 1 if you haven't checked that out. It will give you a little bit better example of like how to play the spec. We'll talk about like rotation, talents, that kind of stuff. I think that there's a lot of volatility into making a video guide this early, and stuff is subject to balance, tuning, and changing. With that said, for more up-to-date sim data, you can check out a link down in the description. It's talking about the Balanced SimC GitHub, and you can take a look at that there if you want some more numeric data in regards to Legendaries, Covenants, Conduits, Soulbinds, that kind of stuff. So yeah, you can check that out. Again, of course, you can always check out the Wowhead guide too. I will be writing about stuff that pertains to the Balanced Druid class there, and that should always be a little bit more up to date because it allows me to edit it on the fly as opposed to a YouTube video where I would have to just completely re-edit and upload it again. So this may or may not be out of date depending on when you watch it. Who knows? This may or may not also be out of date 3 days after making it. I don't really know. Yeah, in addition to that, check out my stream if you have any questions, twitch.tv/Tettles. I really do appreciate it, and I appreciate all the support that I've been getting lately, so thank you. So with that said, let's jump straight into the video. And starting off, we will talk about conduits. Conduits are increased in value based on item level primarily, and generally it will be of greater value for you to take a higher item level damage conduit at the expense of some of the lower item level stuff. But assuming that all things are equal, then there are some things that will end up pulling ahead, and we'll talk about what you should play after we talk about like what exactly conduit options there are. So first off, you have Fury of the Skies, which is Moonfire and Sunfire increase your arcane and nature damage by 1%. It double dips on astral damage, of course. We talked about astral damage in the part 1 video, so if you don't know a ton about astral damage, I would highly recommend watching that or looking into astral damage and how it works with double spell schools. Next is Umbral Intensity, where that is Eclipse's damage bonus to Wrath and Starfire, starts out a little bit stronger. Stellar Inspiration, which is Star Surge and Starfly have a chance to empower your Eclipse or extend your Moonfire and Sunfire. And then the final one is Precise Alignment. The duration of Celestial Alignment / Incarn is increased by some amount. It does not work with Pulsar. Important to note. Next, you have the Covenant-specific conduits, where Kyrian is Deep Allegiance. It reduces the cooldown on the Kyrian ability. It's really, really bad. It's actually a damage loss because Combat Meditation, you can only proc every minute from Pelagos. Pelagos, even after all of the nerfs that it has gotten, is still our best Covenant, or still our best Soulbind, not our best Covenant. Still our best Soulbind, and Combat Meditation is still OP, so Deep Allegiance is actually really bad. I would recommend not ever using it. Necrolord's Evolved Swarm, it buffs your dots even more whenever Adaptive Swarm is on it. Pretty solid for what it is. Night Fae is Conflux the Elements. Whenever you're channeling Convoke, your damage is increased by a little bit. And then Venthir's Endless Thirst, which is every stack of Ravenous Frenzy increases your crit by 0.5%. Which conduit do you pick is a question that I end up getting a lot. Basically, regardless of what covenant you are, you pick the covenant conduit except for Kyrian. Deep Allegiance is a damage loss, like I stated, so you do not take that. Then you take Fury of the Skies as your second, assuming that all of your conduits are the same item level. If they're not the same item level, then you probably just take the higher item level one. Kyrian, if all things are equal item level, is Fury of the Skies and Umbral Intensity. As for Finesse and Endurance conduits, I didn't necessarily want to talk about these, but we're just going to only mention the good ones and just kind of go through these quick as possible. So the first one is Tough as Bark, which is Barkskin CD. That one's pretty good for Endurance. And then Well-Honed Instincts is the other Endurance one. Basically, you Frenzy Regen. It procs whenever you dip below 40% HP, and it doesn't send you into bear form. So those are the two Endurance conduits, and the only ones that are even worth taking, really. Finesse, you have Front of the Pack, which is extra duration and range on Stampeding Roar. The other Finesse conduits are all kind of whatever. So yeah, that is conduit talk. And so with that concluded, we'll jump straight into Legendaries. So there are currently a lot of bad Legendaries. If it's not mentioned, it's probably not good. And that is an important distinction to be made because there's a lot of bad Legendaries for Moonkin specifically. Another question that I get a lot is, when do you craft your legendaries? And the answer is whenever the time is right for you. Personally, I will be doing it after Heroic Week, so I will do all of Heroic Raid without legendaries because I don't want to get nerfed on my permanent decision randomly, because Balance of All Things could get nerfed or Primordial Arcanic Pulsar could get nerfed, and I don't want to have any of those crafted and then get nerfed randomly. However, the decision could be different for you. You could want it could not matter at all, and you just like completely send it. You don't really care about like early mythic progression for raiding, anything like that. So craft it whenever it feels right to you. Craft it early, craft it later. Just make sure that you're getting your soul ash from Torghast on the weekly as much as you can. So that's important. Whenever you craft it is up in the air for whenever it works for your guild and for you personally. What stats do you put on your legendaries? So basically you're able to apply stats to the shell, and more often than not you're going to put mastery plus haste or mastery plus crit. For Balance of All Things in particular, you're going to want mastery plus versatility. It really ends up depending on your stat weights. Just make sure that it has mastery on it. That's all that really matters. All right, so now let's talk about the legendaries that are actually usable. So the first one is, of course, Balance of All Things. Basically, whenever you enter Eclipse, it increases your crit strike chance with arcane or nature spells by 50%, decreasing by 10% every second. It's basically your best for raid and single target situations. Primordial Arcanic Pulsar is after you spend 300 Astral Power, you get Celestial Alignment for 12 seconds. This one is really solid for Mythic Plus, and it can be really good for a few raid encounters depending on how the Pulsar proc lines up. But so for most things, Boat and Pulsar are your raid and Mythic Plus options. Circle of Life and Death is your damage over time effects deal their damage in 25% less time. It does not include stuff like Fury of Elune or Starfall, but it's a really solid option for Mythic Plus, but unfun to use, so I typically lean towards Primordial Arcanic Pulsar. It's also your best in slot for spread AoE cleaves or like council style fights, that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's basically the conclusion of legendaries. Like I said, if any of them are not mentioned, then they're probably not worth using, or they're like really undertuned at the time of recording. Okay, so next up we have Covenants and Soulbinds. So basically I'm doing these at the same time because I feel like this makes the most sense. Just because whenever you're selecting a Covenant, you're selecting the package of the Covenant plus the Soulbinds. Like the Conduits are independent, the Legendaries are independent, but the Soulbinds and the Covenants are kind of a holistic package that you really kind of have to think of. So the first off, we're going to talk about Kyrian. And Kyrian's ability is called Kindred Empowerment. And Kindred Empowerment, you end up linking up to a partner, and then 20% of your damage goes into a pool that your partner can spend from. 20% of their damage will end up going into a pool that you can spend from, and you both spend from that at a rate of 15% bonus damage as long as you guys have damage banked up in the pool. So if your partner is completely dry on the pool, but you have damage in the pool, you will only be the person getting the 15% bonus damage. They will not be getting it. But basically you end up having your own independent pools, and you'll be able to do 15% bonus damage and gaining it at a rate of 20%. So it gets spent on damage, healing, damage taken absorbs basically everything. So it is assumed in Sims right now that about 15% of the pool will be lost to just random stuff such as Ysera's Gift, healing, that kind of thing. So there is some assumptions there that you are going to be losing some damage. It is a 1-minute CD, so there are some specializations that are going to benefit more from it being a 1-minute cooldown than others, like Fire Mage, Marksmanship Hunter. DPS Death Knights are also pretty strong, both Frost and Unholy, at utilizing Kyrian. So basically just pick stuff that has high burst every minute. Alternatively, you could just pick your best player in raid, and if they're overperforming, then like that may be your best bet. At the same time, you can kind of test around in raid, kind of go pull to pull to see who's going to suck versus who's going to be good. So there's a lot of things that can go into selecting a target for Kindred Empowerment, but people who have one high burst every minute are generally going to be the go-to. As for Soulbinds, the only Soulbind that's really worth talking about is Pelagos. Pelagos kind of dwarfs everything else from the Kyrian Soulbind. Combat Meditation gives you just an absolute ton of mastery, and that in of itself is going to be enough to be able to carry Pelagos to being one of the, if not the best Soulbind that you even can run. So yeah, that's basically that. We also talked about the Kyrian Conduit. Again, like I said earlier, do not run the Kyrian Conduit. It's not very good. Next up, we have Venthyr. Venthyr's ability is Ravenous Frenzy. For 20 seconds, your abilities increase your damage by 2%, increase your haste by 1%, per stack, and you gain stacks by abilities that are cast during the Ravenous Frenzy, and it is a 3-minute cooldown. It's also off GCD, so macroing it in a Celestial Alignment is pretty good. It makes our damage really, really burst heavy on 3-minute windows, which can be nice situationally, but overall I found it more annoying than cool. The ability itself is actually fairly fun to play though, so I don't mind it as a whole. As for Soulbinds, the two that are even relevant are Nagia versus Theotar. Generally, I would recommend picking Nagia as they're close in damage, but Theotar's umbrellas are fairly hard to use from my experience personally, and Thrillseeker is considerably easier. So basically, I just end up playing Nagia anytime I play Venthyr. For Necrolord, the worst covenant for Moonkin and the least fun, it's basically an extra dot. It's called Adaptive Swarm. You put a dot on a target, and that increases all of the periodic effectiveness onto that target. It also includes stuff like Starfall and Fury of Elune. We're not really a dot spec, but Necrolord is only good on 1 to 2 targets realistically, because it has like pretty bad target caps, and like even though it is a 30-second cooldown, you can't have like a bunch of adaptive swarms out at a time, and it doesn't really do any considerable amounts of AoE. There are also some refresh parameters to note if you do in fact choose Necrolord, and those are: 1, use adaptive swarm whenever there's no swarm active; 2, you refresh as late as possible on swarm with 2 or fewer stacks; or 3, you refresh a 3+ stack swarm so that the new swarm arrives just as that previous one expires. And the Soulbind for Necrolord is a mini. A mini has like a group-wide int buff that is okay, and just in general beats out the other options. I think the other options are actually incredibly bad damage-wise, so don't really worry about it. A mini is going to be your best bet. So last but certainly not least, we have Night Fae, which has been buffed. So I'm having to re-record this. This is the reason I did this in 2 parts. Basically, I am re-recording this a second time, all the covenants, because Night Fae got buffed to 16 Druid spells up from 12 over 4 seconds. What I have to say about Night Fae is it's actually incredibly powerful for patchwork single target, so the viability of Night Fae is going to be mostly aimed around raid. There's also a lot of AoE fights in Castle Nathria, so I'm not sure what's going to be best between Night Fae and Kyrian, but I do feel like Convoke actually has an incredible amount of burst on single target, and I'm overall really happy with the state of Night Fae. Just for reference, it sims about 4 to 5% higher on patchwork single target, but if they're like targets that are immune or targets that don't want priority damage on it, it doesn't prioritize your main target for Star Surge or any like wraths or anything like that. It will end up hitting stuff that could potentially be immune, potentially be healing. I don't think it hits CC targets anymore. I think they fixed that, but yeah, it can target immune targets, which is incredibly bad. I think the general ratio is about 11 damaging spells to 5 healing, or 10 to 6. I've found 10 to 6 to be far more common than 11 to 5, so that's about the ratio that you should be seeing more often than not. The Soulbind that you're looking to go is Naya in basically every single situation. A lot of other specs actually want to play Dreamweaver from like 13 to 25 because they have an extra potency conduit over Naya. Not Moonkin's. Moonkin does not care at all. My cat just jumped on my desk. Moonkins do not care at all. They want Naya all the way through. Also, once you do end up having full renown, the Naya's tool Burrs has been hotfixed and now is really, really strong. So I have the last little bit of notes titled, quote, but I want to play Night Fae. And so this is basically where I'm going to talk about making your selection and what it really means. Basically, for single target, aka raid, you can kind of play whatever you want. The options are really close to where you can get away with Venthyr or Necrolord if you really want to. I think that the general choices are going to be, in terms of for damage purely, are going to be between Night Fae and Kyrian. I have a suspicion that Kyrian as a whole will overperform Night Fae in the raid, but there will be situations, and you're going to notice them heavily if you select Night Fae, where you're just going to outperform a Kyrian Druid. Like Sledge Fist is going to be heavily weighted towards Night Fae. However, there are going to be fights such as Sire Denathrius and Stone Legion Generals, where I think your overall damage is going to be substantially higher if you play Kyrian. So you kind of have to weigh pros and cons of the selection for raid in particular. For Mythic Plus, if you're not Venthyr or Kyrian, I feel like you're kind of trolling because those two are the only real options that have any relevant amount of AoE scaling. Night Fae is absolutely abominable. Somehow Necrolord comes in even worse. So yeah, those are not hot for multi-target situations, aka Mythic Plus. Alrighty, and that concludes the part 2 of the Balanced Druid class guide video. Again, check out my Twitch stream, check out my YouTube, check out my Twitter, join my Discord, all that kind of stuff. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.